Because site modifiers should align wherever possible and never cross, accuracy in drafting is critical when you're combining different site modifiers together. One of the best ways to be accurate in your file when you're creating multiple shapes that need to align perfectly with each other is to use a workflow where you're reusing the same line work over and over again. And so to do that, we're going to go ahead and draft our line work and then use both the inner boundary command as well as the create objects from shape command to create different objects in our file. So to get started with, let's talk a little bit about the design. Before you start creating objects in your file, you want to make sure that your design and your ideas are fully fleshed out before you start drafting. Remember, drafting on computer is really not ideal for the ideation stage. You want all of that work done on paper beforehand. So begin your design on paper before you ever sit down to the computer. To demonstrate this workflow, I'm going to go back to our original site model that we worked on and kind of start from scratch. So here's what the file looks like right now. I'm going to go back into a top plan view. And then on the Linework design layer, much like we would have done for the base layer, I've gone ahead and mapped things out using the 2D loci points. And so now I need to start adding my line work. And the first thing that I'm going to recommend is, instead of using tools like the rectangle tool, we're better off using the line tool, especially in the constrained mode if this is a line that's perfectly horizontal or vertical, because you want to make sure that all of your alignments are perfectly accurate. And even though we have great tools in the snapping palette, sometimes the alignment can get a little bit off if you're using things like the rectangle tool. So if at all possible, go ahead and use the constrain mode of the line tool when drafting. And then another thing that I recommend is that you overdraw all of your lines just a little bit, because that way you know that when you use the inner boundary mode of the polygon tool, that you're going to have a good closed shape that you're working with. The other option that you have there, let me go ahead and get this sidewalk finished. So just overdraw everything a little bit as I'm demonstrating right here. If you want a cleaner file, there is a tool here in the basic tool set, the Connect Combine tool, and you can go ahead and you can clean your line work up with that tool if you'd like. I still like having overdrawn lines because then I have a visual and I know that that's going to line up perfectly. So let's go ahead and keep drawing. This is the driveway. And even though I have several 2D locus points along this driveway, all I need is one line. And my overdraw doesn't need to line up. But I guess I am today. So just going to keep drawing. The other thing that's really neat about that Connect and Combine tool is, let me draw a few lines that will be connected but aren't connected in the beginning. So just based on this shape, I can come over to the Connect Combine tool, and using this dual objects mode, I can come and click all of these points and it'll automatically connect them. So you can actually underdraw and then come and clean it up after the fact if you want. So there are always lots of different ways that you can work in Vectorworks. Kind of play around and find out what methods work best for you. Now, when we use the inner boundary mode later on, so if we're filling in this area for the sidewalk, the inner boundary mode will not draw around these lines. It'll actually just go on top of it. So you don't need to worry about overdrawing in that regard. So this is a pretty good example of what the Linework design layer should look like. The purpose of drawing your line work like this is so that as you make different objects in your file, they align perfectly. For example, let's take a look at the driveway. So to make the driveway, I would come over and get the polygon tool and set it to the inner boundary mode right here. I'm going to click on the shapes that make the driveway. And then I'm going to come over here. Let's start down here at the bottom. I'm going to come over to the landmark menu, go to create objects from shape. Then for object type, I'm going to switch this to a hardscape. And then I will go ahead and delete the source shape because this is a polygon that's been created by the inner boundary mode of the polygon tool. It's not my original line work. The original line work, you want that to stay in the file on the line work design layer. So I'll go ahead and delete that polygon because it's not the original line work. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go through the options for a hardscape. Under the configuration pane, set the configuration to boundary. Under the Draw 2D pane, set the main area class to either hardscape class to use the attributes palette as the default settings, or select a specific class, for instance, a custom material class. Under the Draw 3D pane, set the 3D type to slab, then click the Main Area Components button. Verify the datum is set to top of component. Components can be edited here by selecting the component and clicking the Edit button. Here you can change the thickness of the material as well as the texture. The most important setting to pay attention to here is the section fill. Set this to solid. If it's set to none, the hardscape will be transparent. Click OK twice to return to the Hardscape Preferences dialog box. Under the Site Modifier pane, select either None or Modifier at top. So go ahead and click OK. And then this is automatically set up, this hardscape is automatically set up to give me a slope. So I can go ahead and make those adjustments to the direction of the slope right now. Great. And I do need to change the elevation at the top of this. So I'll just come over here right now and make that 3 feet. And then the elevation at the end of this should be 0.1 inches. So I'm all set up and ready to go on this hardscape object. I'm going to come over here to the layers field and I'm going to move that to the hardscape design layer. And then I'm going to work with the other half of the driveway right now and I'm going to go through the exact same steps. So I've selected the polygon that was created using the inner boundary mode of the polygon tool. Then I'll come up to Linework, create objects from shape. It's going to be a hardscape. Go ahead and click OK. And I'm just going to double check. Under the configuration pane, set the configuration to boundary. Under the Draw 2D pane, set the main area class to either hardscape class to use the attributes palette as the default settings, or select a specific class, for instance, a custom material class. Under the Draw 3D pane, set the 3D type to slab, then click the Main Area Components button. Verify the datum is set to top of component. Components can be edited here by selecting the component and clicking the Edit button. Here you can change the thickness of the material as well as the texture. The most important setting to pay attention to here is the section fill. Set this to solid. If it's set to none, the hardscape will be transparent. Click OK twice to return to the Hardscape Preferences dialog box. Under the Site Modifier pane, select either None or Modifier at top. And so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Everything looks fine there. And then for this particular hardscape, this doesn't have a slope. So let me turn the slope off on this one and then set the elevation to the correct height, which is 3 feet. Then I will reassign this to the hardscape design layer. And now let's come over to hardscapes and take a look at this. So I am completely confident that these two hardscape objects are aligned perfectly, and that's because I used the inner boundary mode to create those shapes. And I know because of the way that I drew those with the line tool that there's absolutely no possibility of error, because this joint right here shares the exact same line. It's not one half of that line is from this rectangle and the other half of that line is from this rectangle. It is the exact same line because I use that inner boundary mode. And so I know that this is set up perfectly. So not only do those two joints line up exactly, if this were an instance where I weren't able to use a slab modifier on a hardscape and I needed to go back and create a site modifier that went with another object in the file, like let's say, for example, stairs. We need to create a specific site modifier that's set to a slope for stairs. We're not able to use the slab modifier that's associated with hardscapes for stairs. So if I need to go back and create a site modifier, I go back to my Linework design layer. Let's go back into top plan view. So my stairs are right here. I obviously need to add a line right there in order to draft the stairs. But I go back to my original line work and I go through the same process of using the inner boundary mode of the polygon tool and then creating a new shape and then coming up to landmark and create objects from shape to make that site modifier. And that assures that the objects in my file will match up perfectly with the site modifier and I won't have any unexpected gaps or any unexpected overlaps. And so this workflow can really help you keep an accurate and precise file that's going to make working with site modifiers a lot easier.